Hello, everyone. I have Christine Beldner here again with me from Ironwood Consulting, and we just wanted to circle back around with each of you for those of you that did attend our Clear Up the Chaos on September 14th. We had so many great questions and participation that we just got through 2 bullets. So we had 3 additional bullets that we were hoping to provide you with guidance on. So I have Christine here with me this afternoon, and we're going to hit on those additional topics. And Christine, I just appreciate your time and guidance as always. And we're going to go ahead and kickstart things with, can you speak to Texas amending the sexual harassment laws that took place September 1st?
Absolutely. It's good to see you again and glad that we could have this follow-up webinar for everybody. There's just a lot happening right now in the community, and there's going to be a lot too in the coming months. So we're going to have to probably have several
backup
ad hoc.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going to be meeting and coming together a lot. So
Yes.
we're happy to do it. So sure. Yeah. Back in May, actually, Governor Abbott signed a bill, Senate Bill 45, adding it to the Labor Code, some sexual harassment legislative changes. And we had plenty of time to kind of get familiar with them, but it always seems to sneak up on us when they're here. And of course, here they are, and we're 17 days past implementation. So, and I think we're all a little bit distracted by all the changes with COVID, but the reality is it's time as employers that we really pay attention to this, because I think these changes to the sexual harassment legislation is really going to end up biting us if we don't pay attention quickly. So I think one of the greatest changes is the expanded definition of employer. I think we're very accustomed as small businesses to think that doesn't apply to me. That's to businesses that are 15 employees, 50 employees, 100 employees in size. And, our companies that are in that 1 to 14 employee range, we think we're pretty good in terms of having to comply with a lot of regulation, but they expanded the definition of employer, and employer can now means anything less than 15 employees. And this could also mean supervisors, coworkers, vendors, contractors can be liable. So it has a large reach. It has a large decreased that number. So this is significant. You can't hide behind a number anymore, and you can't hide behind a definition anymore. So small employers need to pay attention to this change. In addition, it really has now aligned with federal regulation in terms of liability. So federal regulation has always said that sexual harassment and the employer kind of is defined as the employer knows or should have known that the conduct was occurring and failed to take immediate and appropriate corrective action. And so now it's saying at that Texas state level, that same definition applies, and that's the liability there. And where employers on the federal level always kind of had a defense back in the day is that, well, how could I have known? The employee didn't report it to me. Well, the reality is the employer, long time ago federally, was held responsible for that. And now that the same is going to happen on the state level. You should have had a responsibility to know. So let's kind of expand too on that, on the amount of employees. So you were previously exempt from litigation if you had that 1 to 14 employees. But now that legislation is expanded to if you're under 15 employees. And again, I want to clarify, an employer is defined as anyone acting directly in the interest of the employer. So that means your supervisors, your coworkers, your vendors, anyone can now be named within that harassment claim. In addition, at the same time, House Bill 21 came into effect uh, that adjusted the statute of limitations for the sexual harassment allegations. And so we will continue to have a 180-day timeline currently in effect for Texas state courts, but extended that sexual harassment allegations have up to 300 days after the alleged event. So anything now that happens after September 1st, the sexual harassment alleged event happening after September 1st, that claimant has 300 days following that alleged event to actually bring forth a claim. So that aligns again with the federal statute. So again, it's that state trying to align with what is already in place federally. So the employees can now sue in either state or federal court as long as the petition is filed on that 300th day. So that's what we're seeing in terms of sexual harassment changes. Again, they were effective, say, September 1st, even though it was signed into the labor code May 30th. Any questions that you might have?
So, Christine, can you speak to different ways an employer can be proactive? What do you recommend an employer do for record keeping, just to show that they made good effort when it comes to sexual harassment?
Absolutely. So, this is an area that how can employers demonstrate should have known, or they took immediate and appropriate corrective action, or they had those appropriate safeguards in place. So let's kind of talk through those things. So how you protect yourself with that should have known with your supervisors and things like that. Well, that's going to be through training, right? So you want to ensure there is no law that states that you have to provide your new hires or your managers, your executive team with sexual harassment training, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. You absolutely should. And you should document that training, your new hire orientation, your supervisors, your executive team, your HR staff. Everyone should receive sexual harassment training, and that should be recurring, that should be frequent, it should be applicable, it should include application, it should use reporting techniques, it should use case studies, it should be your most thorough aspect of your training program, and it should not be overlooked, and it shouldn't be tossed aside and just something that should check the block. If there's any training program that you truly invest in beyond safety, it definitely should be your sexual harassment training, because without a doubt, this is going to be the program that you can use to protect yourself against claims, to show that you had plenty of basically protections in place where your supervisors, your employees should have known better and did understand the reporting policies, and you protected the company. And then let's talk about appropriate action, appropriate corrective action. How can you demonstrate that you did appropriate corrective action? Well, again, that's going to be making sure that you've addressed a solid workplace investigation policy and program. And, if you're a small business, your HR department of one, they likely don't inherently have that skill set, or perhaps they're an HR generalist and they're focused on those day-to-day HR operations, and they're not consumed with writing an HR workplace investigation program. Make sure you're empowering them with resources like a SURE membership, where they can have access to that workplace investigation toolkit that SHRM offers, or that they have resources to NCW or Sanford and Tatum or Iron through our relationship consultants like Ironwood that can help them perform those workplace investigations to ensure that those are done properly. Things like that set your small employers up for success. So insulate your company, protect your company, and become compliant to the extent that you can.
Thank you, Christine. And just as a
You bet.
reminder to all of our clients, I do want to remind everyone that we do have a platform that you can utilize our sexual harassment training, and we've had great success with that. And it is complimentary. If you are interested, feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to walk you through that. I would just need a list of employees, and then it has a great tracking device. It provides a certificate for each employee's files. So it's really beneficial and, again, complimentary. And I can't stress Ironwood enough, as well as a great, added resource just to have in your back pocket. Even if you think you're doing the right thing, I always encourage our clients just to make a call and bounce things off, and make sure you are doing things the way they would suggest you do them. So thank you, Christine. That's great information. So moving on to our second bullet point that we were going to be getting to last week, or last Tuesday, I should say. Can you speak to the Texas Compassionate Use Program changes that, again, were effective September 1? Lots happened on September 1
Yes.
with the expanded use of medical marijuana.
You bet. So this is interesting. I think we're only going to see more and more changes when it comes to the use of medical marijuana. I was just at the SHRM National Conference in Las Vegas, and there was an interesting conversation taking place about there's only one state, and that's Florida right now, that actually allows for the use of medical marijuana in the workers' comp program. But it was a heavily debated topic about how that's going to be probably sweeping the country. So this is really just the start, I think, of sweeping changes in the workplace in terms of medical marijuana. So that's why I think these monthly webinars are important, because you guys really are at the forefront of disseminating information like this to your clients, and I think that's great. So again, diving into this, this most recent change here in Texas. So the state is trying to expand the use of medical marijuana, and this particular change provided more use to include patients with PTSD and some additional forms of cancer. It was previously expanded in 2019, and this just took that expansion a little bit further. Basically, it increased the limit of THC concentration from 0.5% to 1%. And it also included some additional disorders like seizure disorders and terminal cancer disorder conditions and things like that. So it was very specific in what it expanded to. And so if you really weren't in the noise of this legislation, and if you weren't particularly affected, and your family wasn't really affected by either the PTSD aspect or that particular cancer that was affected, you probably weren't really monitoring this legislation that close. But certainly if you were in the medical community, you are probably affected and you are watching this closely. But how this does affect employers is that as employers, this can start to be treated similarly to other substances, as prescriptions similar to Xanax. So those type of drugs that do impair employees in your drug policy, similar to things like Xanax. So it's just a really good time to start looking at your non-DoD substance policies, and let's kind of talk about what that means and the implication of those kind of policies. So let's consider some of the following changes that we judge at Ironwood you should consider. This doesn't change. Employees must follow local, state, and federal guidelines for controlled substances. That remains the same. Instances where alcohol is mentioned in your policies, we suggest that you now refer to alcohol and THC cannabinoids in your policy. And Elizabeth, if it'll help, I will send you that kind of statement so you can include it in the notes of this webinar.
That'd be great.
Expand phrases like under the influence in your policy to include inebriated or impaired by drugs or alcohol. So again, it's just kind of the nuanced language of your policies that you're going to want to take a look at. Expand policy language to include impaired. So again, you might already have impaired language in there, but again, your focus was likely on alcohol. So reread that policy, and if it's speaking to impaired, if it's really just speaking to alcohol, again, go back and look at that language and see if you need to alter it to take perhaps a broader point of view, and does it really need to speak to drugs and alcohol impairment. And some examples, again, because impairment for drugs does look different to impairment to alcohol. So, and I can shoot you some of these too, Elizabeth, but unusual changes in speech, irrational or unusual behavior, carelessness that has or could result in injury, loss of physical dexterity, and I've got several more that I can shoot over to you. But again, you just have to be careful because impairment to drugs, though, again, could also be signs of something else. It's not as clear cut sometimes as impairment to alcohol. Impairment to alcohol really most often is very clear. So employers, again, are going to have a little bit more challenging time in the workplace, again, making that call. So also, it's now a good time, in our opinion, in Ironwood, to address some reasonable suspicious training. So if you haven't provided reasonable suspicious training in your workplace, we strongly recommend it. We believe even if you're a non-DOT type of company, it's always a good time to have reasonable suspicion training. You would want to have your supervisors, your managers, your HR professionals trained in recognizing signs of alcohol and substance abuse. Again, we can kind of really go at length, but you're looking for those physical signs, those slurred speech, shakes or tremors, sleeping at work, unusual body or breath odor. Again, that list is long. And then we've got psychological signs and inappropriate laughing, unexplained fear. Again, reasonable suspicion training would kind of walk you through and your staff through all of the signs to look for. It will walk you through strategies on confronting employees, and walk you through what the protocols are for moving forward. And, okay, now you've confronted an employee, what are the next steps? So just something to think about. And now that you've looked at changing your policy and making updates to it, now you've considered perhaps taking some training that you haven't considered before. Now you have to look at what if a violation of company policy takes place, and it's going to be a little bit challenging because if the use of THC is happening outside of the workplace and you are testing it and it's still an employee system, how are you going to substantiate and determine, was that medical use, was it during work hours, on employer premises, things like that. So you're going to have to make sure you're addressing that in your policy. So there's a lot to be considered. There's, I'm sure, a lot of resources out on SHRM. Ironwood is also available if you guys need some help. If you've never drafted a policy of that nature, who thought we would ever be at this point where we need to, but here we are. Yeah, uncharted territory likely for Texas employers, but expect more of the same definitely in the coming years.
Yeah, I think we can for sure say expect the unexpected.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Definitely. And I think Texas, we can count on being one of the slower states, which is nice. We can kind of watch what the other states are going to do.
Right.
Nonetheless, we all will have to be prepared over time. And this is just one example.
Absolutely. So it seems, Christine, that dates that have been set, they continue to get expanded. And
Yes.
Speaking on our third bullet point, so the I-9 virtual review was set to have already expired, but it seems as though that has now been extended to December 31st. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that is, some good news because the timing couldn't have been better with the COVID new variant, Delta new variant, seemed to be hitting right at the same time of that announcement. And so I think a lot of employers who are making their back to work plans, kind of came to a halt and continued with their remote work. And so I think we all kind of had a sigh of relief that they announced for that continued allowance. So yes, if you are exclusively in a remote setting due to COVID-19 precautions, you continue to be exempt from the physical inspection of those I-9 backup documents. But if you are not exclusively in a remote setting, then you still need to continue to review those documents. So be careful that you're not doing some hybrid or falling in and out of compliance. But yes, if you were exclusively remote, then you can continue to review those documents remotely until the end of the year.
Okay, so for clarification, so if there are people still operating in the office and there's some that work from home, even though people are still in the office, they need to be reporting those like normal.
Yes. So if that employee's position is exclusively remote and they're not coming in, yes, that is acceptable. But if the whole workforce is exclusively in the office, then yes. Then they would have to provide those backup documentations in person with physical inspection taking place once normal operations resume. And I can send you guys the latest update if that would help.
Yes, that would be fantastic. I would appreciate that. Yes, we had a quick visitor there. And
and that's part of our continuation too. Our remote continues. And so I don't know if I got all that switched around because I was watching. So
no, you were good.
Yeah.
Yes. If you would send that over and then send over those other things that we talked about as well regarding the policies, that would be fantastic.
You bet.
Perfect. Well, as always, we so appreciate you and your guidance, and we look forward to our next Clear Up the Chaos, October 12th. So mark your calendars.
That sounds great. And, thank you for coming together today so we can continue the conversation and look forward to seeing what changes we'll have in just a couple of weeks, right?
Indeed. I know there'll be many more changes ahead, so we'll be ready.
All right. Have a great month.
Thank you. You too.